Why France is another Russia to India? We people hate the West now. What's your views on France, and what's the difference between West and France? Why France is against world big brother interest, and why Germany and France are not happy with the US interest? Okay. No one hates the West. I don't hate the West. I've lived in the West. There is so much to learn from the West. I have absolutely nothing against the people of the West. But yes, the West is a force of that has caused an enormous amount of harm to the world. It has destroyed Africa. It has destroyed Asia, and so on. So we will not go get into that. Now, what's the question is, why is France another Russia to India? Well, France is not another Russia to India. But yes, okay. The other question is, what's the difference between the West and France? There is no difference between the West and France. France is very much part of the West. France too has been a major colonial power. France too has indulged in a great deal of destruction, especially in Africa. So you can't absolve France of all of that. France instituted slavery in the West Indies, and so on. So France has a very dark history. It still interferes greatly in Africa, in the internal matters of African countries, in North Africa, and so on, the sub-Saharan region, and so on and so forth. So France is very much part of the West. It is culturally and geographically part of the West. It is part of the European Union, an integral part of the European Union, which is essentially a bunch of nations that is dominated by the US. France is also part of NATO, which is again a bunch of vassal states of the US. The EU is a large bunch of American vassal states. NATO is a smaller group of nations that are US vassal states, right? But among all of these nations, France is the only nation that has a reasonably independent foreign policy. It decides, it makes its own decisions, which are not influenced by American interests. And that's why there is a great deal of friction between France and the US from time to time to time. It keeps happening. And there are calls within France for France leaving NATO, that France should leave NATO. And yeah, that's the relationship. That is the fraught relationship France has with the US. It's the only nation in the EU and NATO that has an independent foreign policy, that is not completely under the heel, under the boot of the US. And France has excellent relations with India. France was the only major Western power that did not condemn the 1998 Indian nuclear tests. And France and India have what you could call a strategic relationship today, a strategic and military relationship. Excellent relations. Our interests converge in a great number of matters, and there's a great deal of cooperation on the military front, and other fronts as well, in diplomacy, and a great deal of convergence in geopolitics as well. So yeah, in that sense, France could be considered to be in some ways, in some ways, kind of like Russia, but not really like Russia. So that's the situation. Germany and France are not happy with the US interest. Well, Germany has no choice. Germany is under permanent US military occupation. So Germany has no option. It is a fully colonized state, so to say. It doesn't have an independent foreign policy or an independent internal policy either. Germany is the US colony. It's a US vassal state, not a colony, a vassal state. France is not. So that's what the situation is. And obviously, at the ground level, people will not be happy about this. People can see what's happening, especially when you're living in that country, that there is no actual autonomy. Your leaders are all subservient to the American interest. So people can see it, and that's why people are not happy with that. But at least in France, there is independence of foreign policy and internal policy, and that's why there is friction between the France and the US. The recent AUKUS deal, the French had signed a deal with the Australians to supply a number of Scorpion submarines to Australia. The deal was signed; it was a done deal, and then the Australians walked out of it because the Americans arm twisted them into walking out of it. So that brought in a great deal of friction between France and the US and Australia. And that's something that is a pattern that keeps continuing. So that is the situation overall. And India and France have very good relations.